Today I'm looking at one player that could leave each Premier League club this coming summer. Now that might well be down to contractual reasons, I think they need a fresh start, there's lots of interest in them. Whatever the case, we're going to talk about it. Let's start with Arsenal then. This is a tricky one because there's a few options on the table. I definitely think Alexander Zinchenko is likely to leave in the summer. It felt apparent he was going to leave in January at one stage to Borussia Dortmund. But I'm actually going to talk about Jakub Kiwior. Because Kiwior's minutes just haven't been there yet again this season. When he first joined the club back in 22-23, I think it was 5 starts. Last season, 11 starts. This season, it's going to be even less. And I still think there is a talented centre-half there. Let's rewind the clock back to last season when he put up his most minutes in an Arsenal shirt in a Premier League campaign. His all-round numbers were okay. They weren't exceptional and didn't jump off the page. And he was never going to be a starter over Gabriel or Saliba. He got a few minutes in that left-back slot. But his versatility as a sort of left-sided centre-back come full-back is quite on trend. A lot of teams are functioning with players like that. Think of Josko Gvardiol, and I think a lot of teams in Italy will be paying significant attention to Jakub Kiwior, who is still only 25 years old, looks like a sellable asset for Arsenal this season, is versatile enough to play in 2 different positions, is left-footed. I don't think he'll go for a particularly big fee, but I do think he would be a smart pickup, particularly for one of the Italian teams. Aston Villa are up against it in terms of FFP. There's a 96% squad wage ratio to turnover right now, which is one of the highest in the entirety of Europe. It's something that will have to be rectified. They've risked quite heavily going for the likes of Asensio and Marcus Rashford, the fact that they have to get into the Champions League or at least go very deep in this season's competition. But if they don't, they might well have to sell players. I think the likes of Morgan Rogers, Ollie Watkins are pretty much unsellable. I don't see Pau Torres as a sellable asset either. I wonder, could they well end up losing Luca Dean? I actually think he's been exceptional this campaign. But that mainly comes from an attacking standpoint where he's creating over 2 shot creating actions per 90. His expected assists are in and around the top 15% of European fullbacks. The reason I've got him as a player that could potentially leave Villa in the summer is that he will be entering the final year of his contract. They've also bought Ian Maatsen to the club for £37 million. That feels like very much a future-proofed investment, despite the fact he has struggled at times so far this season. I think Luca Digne has performed to a higher level. And given he's 31 years old now, do Aston Villa want to give him a new contract on a heavy wage when he has had injury problems in the past, he's not getting any younger, and that squad wage ratio is so high? Bournemouth have got a number of players that could end up being pillaged this summer, but one of them stands out because of his £55 million release clause as reported by Fabrizio Romano, and that is Dean Huijsen. Still only 19 years old, we're talking about one of the finest centre-halves in Europe. I just wanted to quickly point to this graph in terms of Dean Huijsen and Pau Kubasi, the future of Spain's central defensive partnerships. What a beautiful pairing these could be. Everything Dean Huijsen needs a little bit of support with, Pau Kubasi has in abundance. And everything Pau Kubasi needs a bit of help with, Dean Huijsen has in abundance. These two, ooh, I really hate coming across like I'm trying to sell off players from clubs that are definitely progressing up the table, and Bournemouth are a really progressive English club right now. They are competing for European spots with one of the best young managers in Europe and a team packed full of talent. But Dean Huijsen's release clause makes him a viable option for some of Europe's most elite clubs. Real Madrid, for instance, potentially do need a young centre-half. They've had central defensive problems this season. They wanted Lenny Yoro last summer. Could they dip into the market and take Dean Huijsen, who was one of the worst sales I've ever seen by Juventus? You've also got the likes of Liverpool, whose central defensive ranks look like they could maybe do with one more addition. I don't think Huijsen would start over Van Dijk, so how it would work functionally, I'm not totally sure. But when you've got progressive carry numbers like this, passing ability like this, an ability at 6'5" to be so silky and smooth on the ball, contribute in both boxes. He's the first teenager in Bournemouth history to score in the Premier League. Yeah, this guy's got everything. At Brentford, I'm going to suggest Bryan Mbeumo. Mainly, again, because of the contractual situation. The fact his contract runs out in 2026 is not a worry for Brentford, because I do think that they would be able to replace Bryan Mbeumo with their smart recruitment structure in a similar way that they did with Ivan Toney. but I do think it makes him far more gettable. And clearly there's going to be massive interest in a player whose contract is up in 12 months' time, is 25 years old, and is putting up numbers like this. Nearly 4 shot creating actions per 90. A really excellent ball carrier. And despite the fact his non-penalty XG is quite low, his actual goal output has been exceptional. Good on set pieces. His all-round play suits top teams because his off-the-ball work is relentless. These numbers for a winger in the Premier League aren't normal. I think, to be honest with you, he would improve every side in the Premier League with his goal output, with his creativity, with his vision and his work rate. Again, Brighton have a lot of players that could well or have been linked with exits, the likes of Carlos Baleba. I think Baleba will stay another year, if I'm totally honest. Just given his age profile and his progression this season, I think he might well need another campaign at Brighton. I think a player that potentially might have his eye on a club in the Champions League is João Pedro. Again, he profiles actually a little bit like Brian and Mbeumo. I don't think he's an out-and-out 9. His ball progression numbers, his shot creating actions are all really high, as is off the ball work rate. So he's not a classic 9, maybe a second striker. I think he could also offer options on the wing. But at just 23 years old, he is pretty remarkable technically as well. There's going to be a lot of clubs interested in João Pedro, from your Liverpools, but I think a club like Arsenal could do a lot worse than a João Pedro. Not necessarily as the number 9, but could he offer an option on that left wing? Also, maybe you push him a little bit deeper and play him as a sort of 10. I think his all-round versatility makes him very viable. He's put up double figures of goal involvements in all of his last 3 seasons, including this campaign, where he is again going to beat his own record and improve on it. I really, really like João Pedro. There is something about his game as well that excites me. He's the kind of player that gets you out of your seat with his dribbling ability. I mean, take, for instance, the finish against Southampton. It's actually rude. Sits the keeper down, that little dink. Delightful. I think of all of Brighton's squad, João Pedro might be the most ambitious for this summer, and there will be interest in him. As for Chelsea, I'm going to keep it simple. I don't see Christopher Nkunku staying beyond this summer. I know that recently he's had a bit more involvement, mainly playing from that left-hand side though, which again, I don't think totally suits his game. And I think you have to ask the question, when Nicholas Jackson is back fully fit, where does Christopher Nkunku fit into this side? I'm not sure he totally does. It felt like he was close to leaving in that January window, or at least Chelsea would have accepted a very reasonable offer. And I think that's probably going to be the case again in the summer. I totally see him going back to Germany because his underlying numbers have maintained as really strong, but when you actually watch him, it feels a little bit like he struggles in this system. Certainly when he's played in that number 9 role, he doesn't have the back-to-goal ability of Nicholas Jackson. He doesn't run the channels like Nicholas Jackson. He doesn't work as hard off the ball at times as Nicholas Jackson. They're very different style of player, and I don't think Nkunku's profile totally fits with how Enzo Maresca wants to play football. And I think it's easy for people to forget that he put up 53 goal involvements across his last 2 Bundesliga seasons. There's going to be massive interest in him from Germany. Do I see that £70 million fee that was being reported in January being realistic? No. To be honest with you, I don't, mainly because of the injury issues. The injury issues have dogged Nkunku's entire Chelsea campaign and career. Crystal Palace, got to be a little bit careful about who I suggest for Crystal Palace. I suggested on a Sky Sports video that Jean-Philippe Mateta might well be a good option for Manchester United, and got absolutely hounded by Crystal Palace fans online. But here I'm going to say I think Mark Gahey is probably the most likely to leave this summer. That again comes down to that contractual situation. It's up in 2026. It's shown no signs of renewal. They've obviously rejected £75 million bids last summer from Newcastle, reports of £65, £70 million bids from Tottenham Hotspur in January. So there is huge interest in Mark Gahey from some of the Premier League's biggest clubs. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to Crystal Palace here, but I think Mark Gahey is ready to play consistent European football. Now, Palace may end up getting in to a Conference League spot, because since about the first 10 games of the season, they've been really impressive under Ole Glasner. But even then, I don't see Mark Gahey staying at the club. During the summer, I thought he was maybe England's best player at the Euros, and it feels a little bit like if he was playing with even better players than Crystal Palace, who have some amazing talents, but, you know, if he was playing alongside some of the world's best centre-halves, he himself might even go to a whole new level. And at just 24 years old, being a captain in the Premier League with the volume of experience he's got, it is a really appealing prospect for a number of clubs to see a player like that with just 12 months left on his contract. As for Everton, this is a difficult one because financially it's pretty unclear what kind of picture they're in. I don't see players like Iliam Dye leaving the club. Obviously, Dominic Calvert-Lewin is going to be out of contract, so he would have been a bit of a cop-out, I think. I'm going to suggest, yet again, Jarrad Branthwaite, and I know Everton fans will not be happy with that, selling off our best players, but he hasn't signed that contract extension. I know his current deal runs until 2027, so they're in a bit of a powerful position, but there was heavy interest in him last summer, and I saw reports this week of Real Madrid interest. Now, if Real Madrid start coming in for Jarrad Branthwaite, as good as David Moyes has done, I just don't see them being able to fend him off. He's still only 22 years old. He's 6'5", and despite the fact this profile doesn't jump off the page, particularly the ball playing doesn't jump off the page, his athleticism in wide spaces, the fact he's left-footed, and his actual composure don't feel like they are being told as a true story in these numbers. For Fulham, I think an easy option here would have been Anthony Robinson. And a lot of people will point to the fact that he was wanted in January, he was wanted last summer. Some of the Premier League's best sides like Liverpool need a left back. And he is putting up, some of the highest tackle interception numbers in the Premier League. He's also putting up a huge volume of assists, double figures this campaign, one of the highest number in the Premier League flat out. But with that contract till 2028, Fulham are in a really powerful position. They're also in a pretty powerful position with this guy, but I think potentially Rodrigo Muniz could leave the club. His profile for a 23-year-old actually jumps off the page. Now, last season, I think he put up 9 goals, and he obviously went through that real purple patch where he scored 7 in 7. This campaign hasn't been quite as consistent. He's been battling with Raul Jimenez 4 minutes. He's had a couple of injury problems, but every time he gets on the field, he gets a huge volume of shots off, which is a great indicator for a top striker. Nearly 4 per 90. He's upwards of 0.5 non-penalty expected goals per 90. His work rate off the ball is very impressive. He's also got a great variety to his finishing. That dink a couple of weeks ago, ooh, that was sexy. Now, currently, his contract expires, I think, in 2026. They do have, as far as I could read, an optional extra year. Fulham fans, let me know in the comments below if that's wrong, but I haven't seen that be triggered yet. So if he is entering the final year or the final 2 years of his contract, this is a Premier League profile that might well tempt quite a lot of the middle pack to stand up and be interested. I know that West Ham were very keen in the winter window, and Fulham wanted a reported £30 million, £40 million then. If that sort of fee is being banded around, some of these mid-table clubs will definitely take a risk. For Ipswich, this is the obvious one. I think if they go down, when they go down, Liam Delap is probably going to be acquired by somebody pretty major. Now, again, his statistical profile doesn't jump off the page, but you have to take into account he's playing for an Ipswich side that have been really quite rotten in the Premier League this campaign. Manchester City have a £40 million buyback option. Could they trigger that and sell him on for a profit? Could they trigger that, bring him back and use him as competition for Erling Haaland? I'm pretty doubtful. But what I'm not doubtful about is that at 22 years old, clubs like Tottenham, clubs like Man United, Chelsea will all be very, very interested in Liam Delap. Partially because the options in the striker market, as I was trying to indicate with Rodrigo Muniz, are really slim. There is nobody out there that jumps off the page and you say, we have to get hold of him. I think Liam Delap is probably the closest to that in the league. To put up double figures of goals in your debut Premier League season is easier said than done. He might end up finishing this campaign on 14 goals. At 22 years old, in your first ever Premier League season, for Ipswich, that is enough for people to stand up and take notice and want to sign you. For Leicester, I think a lot of people at home would say Bilal El Kudus, but I'm actually thinking Mads Hermansen here. He's currently sitting 5th in the Premier League for expected goals prevented per 90. That is amongst the top 1% for post-shot expected goals for shots on target. So he is obviously facing a huge, vast quantity of shots, but when they're hitting the target, he makes some outrageous saves, Mads Hermansen. Think back to that Arsenal game in the first half of the season. That was one of the best goalkeeping performances of the entire campaign. Last season as well, the numbers were mirrored. He was easily the best goalkeeper in the Championship, in my opinion. His ball-playing ability under Enzo Maresca was very underrated, and it would not be a huge surprise for Chelsea to dip into the market and have a look at Mads Hermansen, given his connection to Enzo Maresca and the goalkeeping issues they've had at the club. As for Liverpool, bit of a cop-out just to talk about the contracts, and we've done that enough, so I don't really want to talk about that. I want to talk about Darwin Núñez and his future under Arne Slot. because I'm not totally convinced there is going to be one. His wastefulness in front of goal has been apparent in big moments this season. They haven't mattered, those misses. You think particularly to the one against Aston Villa, because Liverpool have been so consistent. But they look better without him in the team. And that's despite him putting up close to 4 shots per 90, a non-penalty XG of 0.6 per 90, which would put him in the top 10% of European forwards. But the reality is, since the start of the 22-2023 season, no player has missed more big chances per 90 than Darwin Nunez. He's at 0.99. He's effectively missing one big chance every single game since 2022. That is a huge number, and when you're trying to compete for Champions Leagues and trying to compete for Premier Leagues, which Liverpool obviously are doing, it can cost you. And I think there's probably going to be interest in him either from Saudi Arabia in the summer or other European clubs. For Manchester City, it's a sad state of affairs, because I do think he has been the guy for the last decade in the Premier League, the best player in the league. It's Kevin De Bruyne. And look, he's still putting up great numbers when he's on the field, particularly in an attacking area. These numbers have always been a joke in the Premier League. He will go down as one of the Premier League's greatest ever players. An argument's been made that he is flat out the greatest ever midfielder. I think you can have that in the comments below. But at 33 years old, he is out of contract in the summer. No decision has been made as of yet, and I think Pep has been pretty open with saying he can make his own choice here. These numbers are pretty stark, and Pep has spoken about in his press conferences the fact that he doesn't have the physicality to run defensively anymore, and that is becoming a bit of an issue, if we're honest. Him, Gundogan, Bernardo Silva all look like they've struggled going backwards this campaign. He's probably going to end up in Saudi. That would be my prediction. He doesn't sign a new contract and ends up in Saudi. As for Manchester United, there's a bunch that are going to leave the club. A few players are out of contract. I think it's extremely likely, though, that Marcus Rashford will leave the club. He's obviously gone to Aston Villa. They have the £40 million clause. I wouldn't be surprised to see him want to stay there. The only issue might well end up being, how does that clause get paid when he would have to take a significant wage cut? Who covers that wage cut in the first place? I'm interested to see how that plays out. I think it's no secret that since he's gone to Aston Villa, his creative numbers absolutely popped. He is really, really dangerous as a 1v1 player. We've known that his entire career, but he's able to get to the byline, pull stuff back to the likes of Ollie Watkins and Morgan Rogers much more effectively. There's just a good atmosphere about him at Aston Villa. Manchester United felt like there was too much pressure, there were too many headlines there. It's nice to see him thriving. I don't know whether this move will happen permanently, but I can't see a way back at Manchester United. If Ruben Amorim is still there in the summer, how does that get resolved? I just can't see it. I think he will leave the club. As for Newcastle, a lot of people will be speaking about Alexander Isak. There's no way he leaves the club this coming summer. I think, though, Harvey Barnes might well be a viable candidate to leave. This will be the second season in a row he's not hit 1,000 Premier League minutes. He obviously has the issue of competing with Anthony Gordon for that left wing slot where he's absolutely at his best. The right wing has been locked down by Murphy this campaign, who's had a hugely underrated season. It doesn't feel like he quite fits into this structure. Now, in his final 2 seasons at Leicester, he put up 30 goal involvements. Really impressive numbers, and his underlying statistics, again, hold up. I think given he's still just 27 years old, and he has proven himself at that lower mid-table club, that a lot of Premier League sides will back themselves to take Harvey Barnes and improve these numbers yet again, get him back to that Leicester level quite quickly. I think a lot of the teams that are competing for European spots should be interested in Harvey Barnes. Very, very tidy player. As for Nottingham Forest, this is a really difficult one because if they get Champions League football, I don't really see any of their players leaving, if I'm totally honest with you. Some of the highest level talents like Maria have signed new long contracts, so I don't really know where to go with this one. I'm going to suggest Morgan Gibbs-White, but I don't truly believe it in my heart. He's under contract till 2027, and we can talk about him joining Champions League clubs, but Forest might well be playing Champions League football, so if that happens, he simply isn't going to leave. His statistical profile, when you compare it to other midfielders, I actually prefer him a little bit deeper. Really, really stands out because he's an excellent ball carrier, a really good creator. He's really combative off the ball, and that story isn't really told in his tackle and interceptions. If you could get him into a number 10 position or an advanced 8, that's where I would really like to see him play, because his actual technical ability, first touch, his turn, his shooting, is really nice to watch. Now, do I think it's viable he leaves? If I'm honest, no. but I just couldn't think of anybody else at Forest. For Southampton, again, the tap in here was Tyler Dibbling. He's definitely going to go. I think Mateus Fernandes will definitely go. But I want to talk a little bit about Aaron Ramsdale. Now, surely when he joined the club, he had some sort of relegation release clause written in. I would be really surprised if that wasn't the case, because despite the fact he does have the occasional meme sort of moment, which is highlighted on social media, Ramsdale's a really good goalkeeper. He's excellent for a club like Southampton. He's made some big saves. His post-shot expected goals to shots on target is in the top 10% of European goalkeepers. His distribution's fine. He's actually okay as well at coming out and claiming crosses in the top 15% of keepers. I know he gets clowned on, but I actually think that is wrong. I don't think he should be getting clowned on, Aaron Ramsdale. This is a goalkeeper who could comfortably play for England. There will be teams in and around the European spots that'll be looking at Aaron Ramsdale and say it's a £20 million relegation release clause. They'll take that risk. I found Tottenham quite difficult as well. I wonder if Yves Bissouma might well have a look at the exit door this summer. I'm not sure the minutes have quite been there this season, and I'm not sure his performance level has been at his best either. At 28 years old, he's also entering the final year of his contract at Tottenham. 1,000 or so minutes in the Premier League this season, and that isn't just down to injury either. A lot of that has been tactical exclusion. He does have a tendency to make a few errors, and I'm not sure Ange totally loves him as a lone six. Tottenham fans, I want to hear your takes on Yves Bissouma, because some of his numbers still pop. You know, tackles and interceptions have never been an issue for Yves Bissouma. His passing has still looked okay, but it feels like his sloppiness in possession at times really frustrates you. As for West Ham, again, a really difficult one. I'm going to suggest Kudus because of the release clause. Now, that release clause stands at £85 million, so it is a big, chunky figure. But I think if you took into account just his last campaign, a lot of clubs would say, ooh, that might well be worth the risk. We are talking about an elite level player here. This season, he has struggled a little bit. His goal involvements are down by about 50%. There are still the obvious positives when it comes to his dribbling. It is absolutely freakish. Nearly 4 successful take-ons per 90 puts him in the top 2% of European forwards. You can't get the ball off him when he's dribbling at you. But his final ball and his decision-making this season has left a little bit to be desired. He's 24 now. Would you take him if you were a Liverpool and Mo Salah eventually leaves the club? I think you would. I think there is such a high ceiling in here, despite the fact it's been a bit of a down year. Okay, Wolves, I think this is a tap-in, isn't it? Mateus Cunha, it felt like that January contract extension really was there to protect his value. Obviously, he has a £55 million release clause that becomes active in the summer, and certainly clubs are going to be interested in him. I see little to no way that he's still playing football for Wolverhampton Wanderers next season. His decision-making has improved yet again. His shots are vast, nearly 3.5 per 90, but his shot creating actions are a similar number. He's so well rounded, so strong on the ball. Take on numbers are exceptional. Progressive carries and passes are exceptional. 19 goal involvements last campaign. It will be over 20 for a pretty diabolical Wolves side, if we're honest. He's going to be playing Champions League football next year, Cunha. I'm 100% convinced. Okay, so that was one player that could well leave their club this coming summer. Who do you think is likely to leave your club? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. I'll see you later. Goodbye.